Hey, folks, welcome again to Draft Talk on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm Alan Saunders. That's Nick Farabaugh. We're talking 2022 NFL Draft almost every weekday in the month of April leading up to the draft. And Nick and I have been to the Combine. We've been to the Senior Bowl. We've been to Pro Days. We're trying to bring our draft expertise to you guys, sort of going position by position through the draft. We talked about the quarterbacks on Monday. We talked about the tackles on Tuesday. We're going to talk about the safeties today, a position of significant need for the Steelers. And it's not really that deep of a class. So I think it's a pretty interesting conversation here. Nick, let's start with the Steelers safety situation, right? They've got Minkah Fitzpatrick, one of the very best free safeties in the game. They are currently negotiating a contract extension with Fitzpatrick. I would assume that they will get that deal done and that Minkah Fitzpatrick will be the Steelers' long-term solution at one safety spot. The other position, however, very much up in the air right now, Terrell Edmonds, who's been the starter ever since he was a first-round pick in 2018. The Steelers decided not to exercise the fifth-year option on his contract. He's still unsigned as a free agent. It does not seem like the Steelers are very aggressively pursuing him to come back, so there's a hole there. Now, we've talked on this podcast and all over the site at Steelers.com or SteelersNow.com about how the Steelers are pursuing Tyrann Mathieu as a free agent. There are one or two other free agent options, although that list is continuing to narrow down significantly as the time goes on. How realistic is it for the Steelers to do what they did in 2018 and just go into the draft and say, heck, we're going to get our safety there if this free agent process doesn't work out?
I don't know, man, because it's not, again, we've said this, it's not a deep safety class. So if you don't get one of 20, I don't know if there's that dude at 52 that's necessarily going to be there because there's no guarantee Brisker's going to fall that far, right? Excuse me. There's no guarantee that like Jaquan Brisker is going to fall that far. There's no guarantee that one of Cine, Hill, they're not going to be there probably, right? So your best options outside of those guys are probably going to end up being Nick Cross or Brian Cook. Or, Jalen Petrie, I guess, could fall to 52, but he feels like a guy that's probably going to be going too. So it's not like there's not going to be a lot of guys that are going to be there for them at 52 that like fit a sweet spot mold. It's kind of like you kind of have this tier of guys that are going to go probably between 20 and 52. And then you obviously have Kyle Hamilton up top. And then you kind of have this like break where there is a gap where you probably wouldn't draft Cook or Cross at 52, but you would draft him at 84. So I don't think you would ideally come into the year with your starting strong safety being a third-round pick. I just don't think that's a smart idea to do that and then not have any depth behind them whatsoever. So even if they're terrible, you don't have a real option aside from Carl Joseph or Miles Killebrew, which, again, neither of them inspire confidence. And so that is kind of reminiscent of, like, Kendrick Green and J.C. Hassenauer last year, if that happens. But the defense is supposed to be your strong suit. So you have to sign someone in free agency and then draft one. I think that there is no way, and I've said this before, I think there is no way that the Steelers don't leave free agency. It could be now, it could be after the draft. But before the season starts, they are going to sign a veteran free agent on the market. I would bet on it happening.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And I think that's been the entire theme of this offseason for the Steelers is that they've gone out and addressed positions in free agency so that they can come into this draft without feeling like they need to take any one position. So I would be very surprised if they go down that road. But whether or not they decide to address the position in free agency, like we've talked about a quarterback, that doesn't necessarily rule that position out for the first round of the draft. I mean, they signed Mitch Trubisky, who was by most people's accounts the top available free agent quarterback on the market, and yet they're still looking at quarterbacks in this draft class. So even if they sign Tyrann Mathieu, I don't think that would maybe if they sign Tyrann Mathieu a 5-year deal, okay, cross that off the list. But I'm not sure that they would I don't think they would do that for one. Tyrann Mathieu's 29. I don't think that's under a 5-year contract. But I don't think that for the most part, signing a free agent will pull them out of the safety market in this draft. However, it is not that deep of a class. And like you were saying, I don't think the class really lines up with their draft picks that well either for the few guys that are there. Do you want to just break it down top to bottom? Who's your number one safety here?
Well, obviously Kyle Hamilton. That one's pretty easy. I know some people are throwing that up now that he's
not a great 40 time.
No, ran a 4.7 at his pro day, 4.59 at the combine, but his tape really doesn't show that. I mean, he's pretty fast on speed. He has really good range. So if he doesn't play that speed, and I haven't seen him play that speed, teams now have GPS tracking data. So I wonder what his metrics look like on there. That's not publicly available, but I would assume based on how he looks, he's pretty good in that area. But it's Kyle Hamilton for me. Then, you kind of have guys, again, there's a group of 5 at the top, which is Hamilton, Hill, Brisker, Cian, Peter. Not in that specific order for me, but I'll probably go Hamilton. I think I'd go Dax then at 2. Then I'd probably go Peter. Then I'd go Brisker, then Cian. But again, I like all 5 of those guys to a degree. I love Dax Hill. I think he'd be a great pick at 20. I think he's good enough to be picked at 20. Maybe he's going to be picked more in that back end of the first round. But if they get him at 20, there is a list of scenarios that happen in my head of where most of the top corners are gone in terms of who the Steelers have visited in terms of pro days and all that, where most of the top corners are gone. The top 3 quarterbacks are gone. Both Wyatt and Davis are gone. And it's very unlikely that it all happens. The top 3 tackles are gone. But the worst case scenario I can come up with is okay, Dax Hill's sitting there at 20, and that's not a bad scenario at all. That's a really good scenario for them, in fact. So that's the worst case scenario for them. And I like Dax Hill at 20. I think Brisker's a really versatile player. Cian's one of the smartest players. Petrie has Mike Hilton vibes to me. So I mean, there's a lot that works well for these top 5 guys. And if any of these top 5 guys are sitting there at 52, you jump at the chance.
Yeah, I agree. Cal Hamilton to me is clearly number 1, even with the time, even with he struggled with some injury. And honestly, it's really funny because a lot of the times I try to gain, my first knowledge about these guys when I see them play against Pitt, and he played against Pitt in 2020, not in 2021, but I thought he was very pedestrian in that game. I think he was very good at all. But Notre Dame didn't necessarily need him to be very good because that game was a rout and the Pitt offense was falling apart. But I think, he's the kind of player that, I'm not sure that he's, well, let's talk exactly about the fit for the Steelers here, right? Because, I mean, they're giving up on Terrell Edmonds, who is, to me, like a prototypical in the box safety. He's strong against the run. He's big enough that you can match up with a tight end. He does a lot of things, and I think really has been a very underrated player in his time in Pittsburgh, and that he's been a very solid starter for them for the last 2 seasons. There was definitely some growing pains, but I think the last 2 years he's been a really solid starter for them. To me, them saying they don't want to go down that road, they don't want to re-sign Terrell Edmonds to some long-term extension, tells me they want somebody who's more coverage-oriented in this role. How does Hamilton fit that for you? I mean, to me, he's kind of like a middle ground safety. I feel like he could play either position that sort of fits the maybe too high where you're going to do different things with both safeties kind of look that I think we might see more of with Terrell Austin and is kind of going around the NFL as a current trend.
Well, I think Hamilton can move wherever you really want him to do. He's kind of a weapon in terms of moving him around, just like Minkah Fitzpatrick is. You move him down over the middle of the field, you move him single high, he can play 2 high, whatever. Minkah can do a ton of stuff, right? And I feel like Hamilton's a lot of the same way. I just think, unlike Minkah Fitzpatrick, who, say, is not great in the slot or down in the box, I think Kyle Hamilton is. And I think Hamilton can work that deep middle of the field. I think he's a guy that can work in the nickel, man or zone. He can be a guy that can blitz. I think you have so much you can do with Kyle Hamilton. He's just such a unique player, and he was asked to do so much at Notre Dame, and he did it all really well, that you can literally put him wherever you want. You can sit him. I would love to sit him in single high. I don't think that's 100% his best spot. That might be his weakest spot. But he showcased the ability to do it. He's very, very smart player. One of the more high football IQ players in the entire draft. And again, he can work him wherever you want. He can cover tight ends. He can cover receivers in the slot. He can come down in the box. He can work the 2 high safety. So if they play cover 2, he'll be very at home there because he's just a read-react type of guy that makes plays on the ball. He is a guy that you can move around. He can come in blitz. So you can do so much different things with Kyle Hamilton that he is really, really a fun player. And so I call, this type of player that I look at Kyle Hamilton, I call him a unicorn because you just don't find guys that do all of this in one. He would be a perfect fit for the Steelers. He's really a perfect fit wherever he goes, as long as they're not a complete, incompetent defensive coordinator and they have no idea what to do with Kyle Hamilton. But I think Mike Tomlin and Terrell Austin are going to know what to do with him if he ends up in Pittsburgh. And I think the fit with Minkah would be great. You're talking about a safety duo that'll be together for at least 5-6 years. That could be the best safety duo in the NFL.
Yeah, now I don't think he's likely to be available at 20, though. I mean, I saw a mock draft this week that had him at 2. I think that's a little insane, but to me, he feels like a top 10, top 15 pick. Obviously, like you're saying, we've said that about a lot of guys, and that one of them is probably going to be there at 20, even if we don't expect him to be. Maybe it is Hamilton, but I think he's probably long gone by the time the Steelers pick. If it's not Hamilton, you talked about Dax Hill. Is he safety 2 for you? Michigan product, another type of guy that I don't think is that prototypical big in the box strong safety. Feels like a guy who can maybe do more things and move around. How does he fit with the Steelers, and what's his value at pick 20?
Interesting type of player, because Dax Hill is more of a free safety, as you kind of said. He's more of a coverage guy, but he's a free safety that's a little bit different from Minkah. Minkah is a free safety that you want to rob the middle of the field, but stay in zones, right? Like Minkah Fitzpatrick, not that he's bad at man coverage. That's not his strength, though. And you saw that like the first 2 weeks of last year, they didn't have a true blue slot corner. So they tried to make Minkah Fitzpatrick the slot corner on top being the free safety, and it just didn't work out. He wasn't as good, and his play overall fell off a little bit. And so Dax Hill is a guy that can actually do that. Like, he can be a man coverage type guy. Now, he's not as freaky in terms of what he does up top and over the middle of the field like Minkah Fitzpatrick does, but that's a good thing to have because that frees up Minkah to do a lot of the stuff over the middle field he likes. That would free up Dax Hill to go down to the slot and let Minkah work in single high. Now, that draft pick to me would signal not that they aren't going to do a lot of too high, but to me, if you're drafting 2 free safety types with Dax Hill and Minkah, you are planning to do a lot of man coverage and you are planning to do a lot of single high, because that accentuates both of their abilities the most, right? Because Dax Hill and Minkah Fitzpatrick are both ball hawks. They're both guys that can work in different areas, and they both have really good range. So I think you are a guy, if you draft Dax Hill, you're not going to too high as much. So you're reverting back to, say, a 2020 version of the defense than last year, where you ran a lot more too high. So it's a little bit different there. But he can play the nickel. He can do a lot of things. He's kind of to me, he's a more athletic, souped-up version of Trey Norwood in a lot of ways. They're very similar players, but he's more athletic. So he's a really good player. I think Dax Hill would immediately be able to come in and start there. He's one of those guys where it makes complete sense to fit with Minkah Fitzpatrick if you want those coverage chops, because you could do a lot of different things on the back end with him.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing that I see looking at Dax Hill and looking at the potential fit is, if you want a guy to cover these hyper athletic tight ends, like the Kyle Pittses of the world, like that's someone that the Steelers, I mean, obviously they don't play the Falcons all that often, but like that's something that the Steelers, I don't really feel like had a great answer for. Terrell Edmonds was okay in those situations, but this would be a coverage upgrade. I do think it would be a run game downgrade, though. You're talking about a Steelers defense that really struggled against the run last year. Let's be honest. I mean, Minkah made 124 tackles. Like, that's not what anybody, including Minkah, wants in that defense. And so I don't know. I don't really love. I think the Steelers could make it work, but I don't really love the fit for exactly what I think the Steelers want to do with that role.
I don't think that's Hill's MO. But I don't think he's a bad tackler. I think he's a good tackler.
I think he can tackle.
He's willing to go down and bang around. Like,
he's certainly not any kind of upgrade over.
Yeah, no, he's not. And he's quick. He diagnoses things. Like, he's smaller because he's like 6'1". He's like 6'1", like 190. So he's a little bit smaller. But he is a guy that throws himself into the run game. Like, that is a thing he does, which is kind of like. I saw one play where he came blitzing off the edge from the nickel spot and took on a huge tackle without fear. Like, he goes in there. And so I like that part of him. Again, you're not getting an upgrade in that area, But also, I don't think you should be looking to your safeties for your run defense upgrades anyways. So I think if they're looking to upgrade their run defense, it's going to be D-line, linebacker, and the safeties can be coverage upgrades. I think that's more important. I think that's where the NFL is moving towards. You need better coverage safeties, and that's what I think the Steelers are looking for as well in their next safety. So I feel like Dax Hill fits that. And again, he's not going to be an upgrade over Terrell Edmonds in the run game department. I also don't think he's some like terrible run defender. I don't think this guy's a net negative in the run game either.
No, I don't either. But I do think, I just don't think that's necessarily just talking about, I do think the Steelers are going to go more too high. I do think they're going to follow that trend. I'm not sure that Scene is an awesome fit for what they're, or I'm sorry, Dax Hill is an awesome fit for what they're looking for. I do think 20 is a reasonable value for him, though. I think that's about where he should go. And is my safety too. For me, from there, I go to Lewis Scene. And talking about Hamilton, who didn't run that well, I think Scene maybe is the one guy we're going to talk about here who probably made the biggest impact with his testing. I think he ran a 4.38. Certainly looks like that kind of player on film. Somebody called him like the scariest safety in college football. I just think he's a fun player, and really gets downhill fast against the run, but also has some pretty good coverage instincts. Maybe a little bit, probably at the high end of where he's projected to go would be 20, but man, a fun player, and one that Kevin Colbert and Mike Tomlin have seen at the Georgia Pro Day as well.
Really fun player. One of the more, he's smarter than Kyle Hamilton is, like legitimately in terms of actual on-field play. He is one of the true, if I had to rank the top 5 smartest players in this class on the field, Lewis Scene would make that top 5. He is one of the smartest players to come out at the safety position in recent memory. Reads everything at an incredibly high level. And if Pittsburgh had Lewis Scene and Minkah Fitzpatrick, you aren't finding a smarter safety duo. Like, you are just not. Those two guys read the field at a different level. Everything looks like it's in slow motion for him. And that's what I love about him. He's just so ready and so fluid. He's just such a calm player. And he really is that type of guy that can work anywhere. He's a good athlete. He can work in split safety looks. He's athletic.
Georgia did play a lot of cover 2, and that's mostly what you see when you look at this tape. And the other thing you see when you look at this tape is just number 16 just screaming forward towards the line of scrimmage to blow up run plays. It's a lot of fun to watch.
It really is. And he reminds me of like Kareem Jackson a little bit, Von Bell, like those type of players. Like, he's a really fun player. Might be better than, Von Bell, who's no slouch for sure, but a Kareem Jackson type of player who can work in overhang, can work in man, can cover tight ends, comes up and absolutely lays the wood. The guy, is a fearsome hitter. On top of this, usually you think of a strong safety, you're thinking of a strong hitter and a guy that's maybe not as good in coverage. No, Lewis Scene does both. He wears both hats, and he's willing to throw his body around. Very aggressive. A guy that
I'll throw this comp out there, and it's a guy that did not play strong safety, but Ryan Clark. That's the vibe I get from Lewis Scene.
I can get on board with a Ryan Clark comp, because I think that makes a lot of sense. Hard hitter, but Clark was always able to do different things on the back end, cover well, high football IQ. Like, that's the type of player Ryan Clark was, right? And so, yeah, if you're looking for a Steelers comp, I think that's the type of player you're getting in Lewis Scene. And I think he fits beautifully next to Minkah Fitzpatrick just because of what he does. If I'm talking about like pure fit, he's a better fit than Dax Hill is. I'm not sure if he's as good a player as Dax Hill is. Again, I think Dax Hill's a really good football player. But man, I watch him and I watch Lewis Scene, and I see a dude that if you even go into nickel or you go into dime, like this dude in the dime package can 100% be your dime backer. Like, he could sit there and actually be a linebacker for you. He is that type of physical, but he's also a guy that is going to go and split field safeties and cover 20 yards downfield or work in single high and has the range to get there. Lewis Scene's a really, really good polished player. He's athletic as hell, smart as hell, everything you look for in a safety. Lewis Scene is. That's why he should go first round. I don't know if he will. I know the hype train is kind of going up for him, but really fun player. It's very hard to poke many holes in his game.
Yeah, for sure. And I do, his stock has been rising pretty significantly. I think 20 would be a bit of like, I don't think anybody else is going to take him there, but I do love the fit for the Steelers, and think that he just screams Steelers defensive back to me. And I think, I really think that he'd be a fun player in that Steelers defense, and a really good fit for them. Going forward is another player that I kind of think is on the end of the first round, maybe a second round pick, probably more likely a second round pick, and that's Jaquan Brisker. I feel like Brisker is more like Hill in that he's like a Swiss Army knife kind of player. Honestly, could play corner. I think could play slot, absolutely. Very athletic, able to do anything. Not the same kind of physical presence as Seen is, more of a coverage first player. But I really like the player. I think he's really underrated. I think whoever gets Jaquan Brisker is going to be really, really happy with that draft pick. But if you're talking about needing a Steelers strong safety, I'm not sure exactly how well he fits that particular mold, even though he's a really good player.
Yeah, again, one of those more free safety types. I think that's ideally where Jaquan Brisker fits in. Has obviously played a ton in the box. Penn State made him do a lot of different things in that defense. So he played a lot in the box. He played in the slot. He blitzed a lot. So that's why you saw him make some really good run fits. The ball production increased a lot recently as well. So he's shown the ability to improve as a ball hawk. I think he's a really versatile defender in terms of how you use him. He can blitz. He can move in the slot, but he's only decent at those things, right? It's not like the same where Lewis Cine is like really good at all those things. Jaquan Brisker is great at being a free safety. In most classes, probably Brisker might be the best safety in the class in terms of all of that. Of course, he's not, because this is just a very good safety class in terms of the top. It's a good top heavy safety class. But he's a guy that if you work him in with Minka, he's probably going to work in a too high system more so in that regard. And so I don't know. The whole too high thing, regardless, is a little bit of a bummer for the Steelers because it takes away Minka Fitzpatrick's best traits too. So I can see why they would want, say, 2 free safeties, because it could allow them to interchange that and run cover 3, cover 1 a lot more. And so I see the appeal of a guy like Hill or Brisker, right, to be able to do that. And Brisker is one of those guys, maybe a little bit more. I don't want to say he's more willing than Dax Hill, because willingness is just not in Dax Hill's playbook. He is willing to the max. And so Brisker's good. I think the thing is, I think Brisker has a few more things to work on than the other two. I think he's a guy that has a few times where he takes some bad angles, especially when he's working on the back end, so he can get caught sleeping a little bit. He needs a little bit more consistency in his read and react stuff. So yeah, he's a good player. Going to be in the NFL for a long time. Maybe not as polished as a Scene or a Hill or a Hamilton, but a good player. And if he's at 52, this is where we start getting into what if he's at 52. If Jaquan Brisker's at 52, there's no doubt in my mind who they are taking.
Yeah, in fact, it feels a lot like the same situation as Pat Freiermuth last year, where like nobody really thought that he was going to be available when the Steelers made their second round pick. They obviously needed a tight end. He ended up being there, and they ran with it. In fact, they skipped their other bigger needs to go do that. And I can certainly see that being the same case this year, where the Steelers probably have bigger needs than strong safety, assuming they take care of it in the draft. In free agency, they certainly have bigger needs than a specifically Brisker type player. But I can just see them saying, you know what, he's too good to go any further than this. 52 is it. I do think, though, if you look at the way, the ones we've talked about so far, and probably the next one as well, is I think Hamilton probably off the board at 20, and I think Scene, Hill, and Brisker probably off the board before 52. There isn't really a player other than maybe Hill that feels like really fits where the Steelers are drafting. And I think the next player we're going to get to, Jalen Petrie, is part of that too. Again, to me, an early second round pick at the very worst from Baylor. Thought he had a very, very nice Senior Bowl. And one of the players to me that really, it's really hard for the safeties at the Senior Bowl to stand out, because for most of the practices, they just stand there in center field and kind of do nothing. Like, you're not going to run up and blow somebody up in Senior Bowl practice. But I thought in the game, he looked really good. And, when you look at his numbers, 75 tackles, 2 interceptions, 7 passes defended, all over the ball for Baylor. Very, very experienced player as well. But again, I think not, in that gap between the Steelers' first and second round picks, and who knows, maybe he'll fall, but I think probably not going to be available for the Steelers.
Yeah, and again, one of those. He's more of a strong safety type. And again, I kind of got Mike Hilton vibes watching him a little bit. Now he's not a pure,
really good against the run.
Yeah, like he's not a pure slot defender like Hilton is. He will be a true safety, I think. But he's a guy that has played anywhere from outside linebacker, inside linebacker, strong safety. He's dipped in free safety. I don't think that's his best spot. I think he should be down low, covering tight ends, roaming over the middle of the field, coming on blitzes. But he's fearless. He will take on anyone. Really. It doesn't matter who's coming at him. It doesn't matter if Ike Ekwonu will come at him. He will come at him and take him on. And it's really something to watch. That's why I say he gives me Mike Hilton vibes, is because he's not a huge guy. I mean, he's not super small, but he's like 5'11", 200 maybe.
Yeah, I think somewhere in the 190s. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the thing about him is it doesn't matter to him. He takes on 6'6", 320-pound guards pulling, and he does it. Like it's really something to watch. Guys his size should not be able to do it, but he is fearless. And so in terms of the run defending department, boy, you get one of the best. I mean, Petrie can come in and be one of the best run defending safeties in the NFL. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. He's that good already. Now, coverage a little bit more so. I don't love him in man coverage. I don't think that's where he's going to fly, but he's a guy that flies. He's a good player in split field coverages. I think he can do that. He's got good instincts, work over the middle of the field, but he's going to make his presence felt by being that physical player. But you're going to have to work him in specific spots where he's, cover 3-ish type, where he comes down a little bit, covers the tight ends a little bit more. Very, very similar type of player to what we said in kind of Mike Hilton.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great fit for the Steelers defense in terms of like what they want their defensive backs to do against the run. I think they demand a level of willingness in the run game that he certainly has. And he lined up in a slot corner role as their strong safety, because a lot of colleges don't go extra DBs, so they'll just put the safety on the slot corner. We see that at Pitt a lot, and he did that a lot. I mean, if you look at his PFF split position, he's in the slot more than he is as a safety, and so I can see Mike Hilton. I can see some of those tendencies, and certainly that's the kind of player the Steelers are familiar with. I think more of a direct Terrell Edmonds replacement here. I think this is the first player that I think you can really just be like, all right, this is mostly what they've had. Not really like an elite coverage guy, but a guy who's super willing against the run, very athletic. He ran a 4.4 something. 4.4. I had it and I lost it. It was in the 4.4s. Trust me.
Yeah, he ran so he didn't run at the combine, but had pretty good testing otherwise.
Yeah, no, the Steelers did not send the top guys to the Baylor Pro Day, and Petrie and Tyquan Thornton, wide receiver, is also a really good prospect, is there as well. So doesn't indicate a ton of interest, but to me, I think a really strong fit just specifically for what the Steelers have been doing.
Yeah, and he ran a 4.44 at Baylor Pro Day. So that I think makes a lot of sense to them. A really athletic player that works in the box. And again, if you're looking at the direct Terrell Edmonds replacement, that's the type of guy you're looking for. But again, as we've kind of said, the way they've been looking at the safeties, not sending the top guys to his pro day, but sending them more so to Brisker, to Scene, to all these guys, to Dax Hill. They went out of their way to go
where Hamilton. Colbert went to Hamilton, where he's really outside of like Jack Cohn, the guy, right? The reason to go there.
And so to me, it's telling me, and we even talk about like Nick Cross, terms of Nick Cross and Brian Cook, like those are two guys that we'll talk about them in a little bit, but they are not box safeties, like straight up box safeties. Like they do not scream that to me. Petrie's the only one that's kind of like, yeah, box safety. Okay. And he's been like the least interested they've shown out of like the top 7-8 safeties. And that speaks to me that they are looking for a coverage more safety. The reason that they haven't pushed Terrell Edmonds to come back speaks to me. I mean,
So
Tyrann Mathieu
they didn't
interest.
take that fifth-year option, which was only $7 million. I mean,
Yeah.
they could have not even been in this conversation if they didn't want to be.
But like, let's look at like their reported interest. Like they reportedly, Jeremy Fowler said they made a push at Kareem Jackson, which makes sense. Okay. Kareem Jackson's a guy that works in multiple spots, right? A guy that can work on the slot, a guy that can work with strong safety. He's a little bit older, but they made a push for him. Tyrann Mathieu, another guy that can do multiple roles and is more of a coverage guy. Makes sense. DeMonte KZ, definitely a free safety. He is a free safety. To me, they are looking for coverage safeties, and they are not looking for a box safety. So it makes sense there. So I wouldn't put Petrie on the likely list to become a Pittsburgh Steeler. Now, he makes sense, but it seems with the advent of Terrell Austin and I think Mike Tomlin looking around the league and seeing the more too high stuff, I think they're switching up their philosophy a little bit.
I agree, which brings us to the next one, and a player that Brandon Hunt scouted at his pro day we talked to at the Combine, Nick Cross from Maryland. If you've been paying attention on social media today, you saw Nick Cross get blown up by John Dotson at Penn State, playing in the slot. I don't think that's his best role. He, again, feels like a free safety to me. He's a little bit bigger than some of the other guys we've said that about, 6 foot 212, but it feels like more of a zone coverage guy. Do you agree?
Yeah. And again, a dude that has sometimes dropped down to the slot, sometimes even played like will linebacker a little bit, and that's not his role. A raw player, right? Like the type of dude that is going to be athletic as heck. And all you have to do is look at his test numbers and say they do not scream Pittsburgh Steelers safety to you. I mean, they absolutely do. A 4.34 40. Unbelievable there. 37 vert. And he had a 11 broad, like all that stuff. That is Pittsburgh Steelers safety. And he's a developmental guy. He's going to be a round 3 type pick. A guy that has played a lot, though. A guy that has really good range. And so he's a guy that is really able to come in, work in that single high, 2 high safety type things. And I think fits nicely with Minkah Fitzpatrick next to him. But again, he's not going to come in and be a day one starter because I don't think he's as smart and as readily available to read through things. I think he's a work in progress in that area. He likes to hit hard, but he's inconsistent in his tackling. Kind of a good guy that can cover running backs or tight ends if you want him to, but he's an athletic ball of clay that you're going to mold in a little bit. And probably year one won't play a ton, could come in as like that dime backer or that 3 safety look. I think he could do it. But not a starter right away. So this is where we're talking about the kind of the fall off of the top 5. Cross is more of a developmental guy. And so when you look at Nick Cross, could be a really good player. I think if he reaches his peak, I think he has all the traits to do that, but not a year one type of guy in that regard.
Feels a lot like Sean Davis, another Maryland defensive back, right? Who kind of like he came in, weren't really sure what his position was going to be, just knew he was a good athlete and that he could kind of do a lot of different things. Cross is a more physical player than Davis, but same kind of idea where ideally this is a guy who would sit for a year and watch and learn, and then maybe we'll see. The thing that kind of, if you're going to go sign a safety, let's say you sign a Tyrann Mathieu to a 2 or 3 year contract, then drafting a player like Cross in late day 2 or day 3 makes a lot of sense for me because you're drafting for that next safety. You're not drafting for a more immediate need. And also just with the number of defensive backs that teams need, an injury or two or who knows what, and a player like that could easily be used in the dime rotation or something like that. There's been plenty of times where the Steelers used a 3rd safety in that role. And I think Cross could probably do that as well. So, and just an interesting player from a connection standpoint was the college roommate of Mike Tomlin's son, Dino, at Maryland. They sent Brandon Hunt to his pro day and not a crazy good Maryland draft class around him. So one of the top reasons to go there, I think the Steelers probably have some decent interest in a player like Cross, but they'd certainly have to come up with a more permanent solution first.
They definitely would. And it would have to be a guy that could come in and play. 2-year deal for Terrell Edmonds. Tyrann Mathieu's there for 2 years, right? And Cross is behind him and learns from him. Like stuff like that would make sense to me. But I think there is another safety in this discussion we have to talk about, and it is Brian Cook from Cincinnati. I think we have to talk about Brian Cook because the tea leaves on the Steelers being interested are everywhere. I mean, from first of all, their formal meeting at the Combine, taking him to dinner in Cincinnati Pro Day, being there. I think he's a better player right now than Nick Cross is. And that's the thing. I think he's a guy in that round 3 area that's going to be very intriguing for them because I think Brian Cook is a guy that needs to work on some of his consistency level and coverage right now. I don't think he's necessarily 100% there in man coverage, but I think he's a guy that flashes some really good range. He can work at a free safety. He can work in split safety roles. He's done that a ton at Cincinnati. So he's ready to do that right away, but he's a really good run defender already, has the physical traits to continue going up. And he's a guy that might not start day one, but he's ready. He's more readily available to play. So if you get an injury, say you do sign Tyrann Mathieu and draft Brian Cook in the 3rd round, if Matthew goes down, I would trust Brian Cook to come in for 2-3 games and give me a good level of play. And so I think that is an interesting option here. They're clearly interested in both Cook and Cross. And so I think that those two guys are very similar players. I just think Cook's a little further down the line in his developmental curve. So I think we need to pay attention to him as well. Those two guys, though, definitely are kind of two in the same boat a little bit in that they're that perfect round 3 type pick, that mold that they would look for.
I agree. And I feel like this is the first place where you can kind of look at those two guys and say, okay, like there's a group here where it's only 2 guys, but there's still it makes safety in round 3 look realistic, where I think with every other player, it's like, well, maybe he falls, or maybe they take him, but it's a little bit of a reach, or maybe he falls. Here's 2 guys at the position where they could just draft them right where they're picking at 84. It would be right in the range of where we expect those guys to go. And it seems easily projectable.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly the point is otherwise, again, I think Hill, Seen are fine picks in round 1 at 20. A little bit early, yes, but both of those guys are back into the first type guys. So if you like them enough, take them. I don't care. They're going to be good players. I think they're really good on tape, and I like what they bring to the table. But they're not as like perfectly glove fitted as Brian Cook or Nick Cross are. Like if I had to pick where Brian Cook and Nick Cross would go, it'd be like 78 and like 85, like right around there. And those are both perfect values for the Steelers sitting at 84. And so that's the only one that feels like a perfect glove fit, barring someone dropping, as you said. If Brisker's there at 52, if Hamilton's there at 20, those are obviously perfect fits, but I wouldn't call that out as being extremely likely to come to fruition.
I agree. Let's move on to day 3. I've got a whole list of guys here. There are a lot of them. I think it's not a particularly deep class as far as like guys I think I'm super excited about. What names from this day 3 list stand out to you?
There's a few guys. Tyson Anderson from Toledo is a really fun player. I like what he brings.
Love their Mac guys.
Yeah, they love their Mac guys. And Anderson's pretty interesting because this is a guy that's very physical, but he's not a true playmaker, which is a little bit worrying because if you know anything, ever since Terrell Austin's come on, the Steelers only get ball hawks, right? They only want ball hawks. If you do not have ball awareness, they aren't going to necessarily get you. But I do like Tyson Anderson when he brings in the peripheral stuff. Smart player, long, athletic, can work him in a lot of different areas. He's very versatile, so I like that. And you could probably get him in round 4, round 5, which I think is really interesting. So they're 138. I think he'd be a really interesting pick for them. I also look at someone like a Kirby Joseph from Illinois. It's kind of an interesting player in that round 4-ish range. Not a guy that you're going to work down low in the box. Going to stay in that too high range, but a perfect too high safety. Very athletic, ready to play right away. Verona Mckinley from Oregon's pretty interesting. Has the ball skills to play there. I think there are a few other guys. Yusuf Corker is interesting a little bit. Really good downhill type of trigger player. A guy that's going to be a really plus run defender right away and has good straight line speed, but is a little tight in the hips. So that could get him a little bit out of there. I think an ACC guy who I'm a little bit interested in is Wanya Thomas from Georgia Tech. I liked what I saw from him whenever I saw him play against Pitt, and I watched his tape a little bit more. I think he's got some really good stuff in man coverage. That's really at least encouraging. but again, has to really work on his stuff above the head. But he's a pretty good athlete as well. So I think there are traits to work with there. If you're looking, I'll say this, if you're looking for a guy that can come in and be like the Trey Norwood-ish type player that I have come to see that could be like, the surprise first, 6th, 7th round pick, I think could make an immediate impact. Marquise Bell out of Florida A&M is one of the guys I would look for. I like Marquise Bell a lot. Athletic, long, the physical tools are great. He's going to be a good special teamer right away, has good ball skills already. He's pretty smart. So Marquise Bell is one of those guys where I look at and I say, yeah, this is a guy in round 6, 7 I could get on board with as really being that kind of day one surprise guy. There's also obviously Steeler connections with guys like Quentin Lake, who's also a really smart player, just not super athletic. He's the son of Cornell Lake. And then you also have someone like Isaiah Polamau, who's more of a free safety, a big free safety at that, the nephew of Troy Polamalu. So there are Steeler connections here in this safety class as well for those late round picks. But I think if I'm going round 6 or 7, I'm looking at one guy to circle. Marquise Bell out of Florida A&M is my guy.
Yeah, I really like him too. In fact, I think I have him at the top of this day 3 list. I do like Yusuf Corker, a little bit stiff, but just another guy that really you can see coming forward and blowing up run plays and just kind of strikes me as a Steelers type of defender. Dane Belton from Iowa is another guy that I like in that mold where he's a physical defender, he ran well, but not like crazy athlete, but I just think a really good all around player. My pick for the name in this draft, best said in a Yinzer accent, Auburn safety Smoke Monday, which is a great name. And when said as Smoke Monday, you can really just kind of see him running down on a kickoff there and eliciting a response from the Steelers faithful. He's a bigger guy too. If you're talking about just, being a pure strong safety, I think Smoke probably fits that mold a little bit better than some of these other guys. There are a lot of options here, but I don't think you talk about some Trey Norwood types, some guys that could fit in right away. But if you're talking about starting strong safeties, even down the road, projectable starting strong safeties, pretty thin here to me, right?
Yeah, pretty thin. Again, that's why Tyson Anderson is kind of interesting to me. He's essentially, I would say this, he reminds me a lot of someone like a Terrell Edmonds, who's never going to be ball productive, but if he can grow into himself, can actually be a average starting strong safety. So like round 4 for him is interesting. But yeah, there's not a lot of guys I can say that to. I think Marquise Bell, if everything works out for him with his physical traits, can become a starter. Pretty good one at that. Again, I think if there's going to be a gem in this class, it's going to be Marquise Bell. Coming from a smaller type of school, but that dude can play. And he really stands out too when you see him. The physical tools are all there. Very smart player as well already. I think he's going to be a really interesting player. And I think he could be a real gem in this class. But there's really no one there in day 3 that, you're not going to get a starting strong safety necessarily around 4. I just don't see that happening in this class. It's not that deep type of a class. So even on late day 3, you're getting maybe special teamers at best, right? The Joey Blunts, Nolan Turner, like those are 2 guys Pittsburgh's brought in for meetings. And those both, Blunt's a guy that has more athletic upside, but probably is going to be a special teamer right away. Essentially, and I said this, I think he's like the dollar store version of Terrell Edmonds. And then there's Nolan Turner, who's like not very good. But
I'd put Bubba Bolden in that list too. If you want to talk about some ACC safeties that I think you could put right with those guys that is getting some talk in like the late day 3 range, but I think it's probably just a special teamer moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. So everything about it is not a great day 3 safety group, but again, if you're swinging for the fences, I'm on team Marquise Bell.
Yeah, I agree. FAMU Rattlers, which is my contribution to the small school nickname discussion, is an elite one, but orange and green, not necessarily doing it for me from a color standpoint. Nick, I think we extensively covered the safety position. We'll see how the weekend goes. We may do more news on Monday. If there's news to talk about, maybe we'll go corner. We haven't done that yet, and I think that's an interesting position in this draft class as well. And until then, anything else? What do you got going on this weekend?
Obviously, the spring game coming up for Pitt, so that'll be a fun time as well. And who knows what else happens in terms of free agency, but ton of going on in the Pitt football world. That's where my focus will be.
Yep, I'll be there as well at Blue Gold. I am very interested to see the quarterback situation play out. My prediction is that Nick Patty will do better than most people think he will do. That is my
I like Nick Patty. I agree.
My Blue Gold hot take. And
my
also Keaton Slovis probably isn't going to play that much. So like they give Patty a whole half or something, he could end up with like 3 touchdowns.
Okay, you want my blue and gold hot take?
I'll take it. Yeah.
I'll have the breakout star of the game is going to be Rylan Gandy.
Rylan Gandy. All right. It's hard for the breakout star of the game to be a defensive back, I think, unless he makes an interception.
Heard very good things from people around the program about Rylan Gandy this spring. He's had a really good spring as a freshman.
There you go. I think some people are going to be very impressed by the wide receiver group they have. Kanata Mumfield is extremely good, but I think honestly, like the guys at the back of that room that maybe people haven't been paying that attention to, like guys like Jalen Bradley, Addison Copeland, are still really, really good. And when they start getting into the bottom part of the depth chart, I think the wide receivers are going to stand out. So if you're looking for somebody to shine in the second half of that game, I think Addison Copeland could be one. I think Jalen Bradley could be one. I think they're really deep at wide receiver, even after some losses.
Like there's a real chance that like 4 out of their top 5 guys end up being NFL players. Like that's legit.
Maybe we'll talk about that on Monday as well. We can break down the 2023 NFL draft from a Pitt standpoint after that. So we'll catch you back on Monday. Enjoy your weekend. For Nick Farabaugh, I'm Alan Saunders. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe here on the YouTube channel so you get the first notification for all of the Pittsburgh Sports Now and the Pittsburgh Sports Live videos. And then, of course, you can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere else you find podcasts. And if there's a topic you want us to hit or a player you want to hear about or a position you think the Steelers should be drafting or who you think the best Yinzer accent draft name is, leave it in the comments. We will get to it and talk about it. And I will attempt your name in a Yinzer accent live if you give me a good suggestion. So we can do that going forward as well. Enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you next time. Until then, thanks for watching, and enjoy Draft Talk on Pittsburgh Sports Live.